So I'm sure everyone knows a person like this. And it doesn't have to be age-related. Because I think it's all about the gossiping aspect. Someone likes to gossip a lot, and namely they speak about you, and you eavesdrop into a conversation, and you're very observant like I am. And it's not about strangers, not just anyone. You're eavesdropping on a conversation where it's your family, a family member, or a friend, and you are brought up into the conversation. You're a topic of discussion. And they say things, they make descriptions, statements that clearly are erroneous. You completely disagree with it. You have every right to be defensive about it, because you know it's not right. Lies, Kathy Bates. And I have an antidote, which is why I've decided to go and make this little tangent. I was eavesdropping on my grandmother speaking to my aunt over the phone. And she was reassuring my sister, who doesn't live with us. She lives with my mom. I was raised by my grandmother. She was reassuring her about feeling alone and her always being reprimanded about things, always being a target. And saying that I too get reprimanded, which is true. I get reproached, but not in the manner in which she clearly perceives, her own interpretation. I don't bullshit. I don't accept it. I am rebellious. So, my rebellious streak is the only aspect of my personality that is often perceived by people, aside from being a walking encyclopedia. So that's literally the only thing that people have to go by me, because I'm otherwise reticent, too reserved. I don't reveal anything. I'm extremely introverted, 100% based on the various quizzes I've taken. Anyway, she basically says that in the process of this reprimanding, there's this outcome that occurs by me, a reaction, that I go into my room. Basically, she tells my little sister, oh, your older sister gets reproached too. It's not as if we don't have our arguments. When we do, she goes into her room and cries. Cries! Honestly, literally a decade ago, that would have been true. But even still, that's very presumptuous of her. It's egocentric. It's like, okay, I waste my tears for you? Or anyone, for that matter. And back then, 10 years ago, I was 15. Which means it was all the teenage angst and hormones, basically. But also during that time, that was the only time you would actually see me literally sobbing. She doesn't even have a recent example to support that, to corroborate that claim. Like me crying in my room. When have you even heard? You're too preoccupied with other tasks and all the other issues, the problems that everybody is piling onto you, because you know that's one of the reasons why she's always often on the phone, and the conversations are the way they are, in which she's clearly venting. And then the next breath, she's saying how strong she is, emotionally strong, which she is. Not trying to discredit that, but compared to people like me, who just are like the stereotypical suffering in silence trope embodied. I do tell someone, but it's often in text form and it's very sparing. So, and overall, again, I still just suffer in silence, per se. But back to the crying. If you had made that statement a decade ago, when I was 15 and I was it was undiagnosed, but severe depression, I was just not the best. I was not at my best mentally, and for a myriad of reasons. Being introverted, the standard kid who's just misunderstood and can't really find there, and then a multitude of other reasons that I have to stop myself from oversharing, because that concept is kind of obsolete to me. If not even, I have a habit of speaking about things that should remain private, casually. But to me, I've had this quirk of separating my emotions from myself. I'm not very connected with my emotions. I just feel, and that's it. I analyze them. That's one of the reasons why. But I'm much better at identifying other people's emotions than I am my own. And when I do, that's because I'm largely apathetic about the majority of things, which is dangerous. And the reason why I'm also still liable, for all of my optimism, I'm still liable to get back, to return, to revert to that low state. But I don't have alexithymia, which is the difficulty in identifying your emotions. Really the only emotions that I do feel now at this point, compared to 5 to 10 years ago, is annoyance, really. I just get vexed about things, which is natural. And it's not healthy to just eradicate emotions altogether. I do feel it. It's just I let them be a present thing, and I don't prolong them. Emotions are there as natural analeptics. They're supposed to be abreactive or depurative, cleansing. They're supposed to be there to be a method of catharsis, as a release, because you need it. But crying would not be pertinent now. No, there's not even a recent example. You couldn't make an example even 2 years prior. For me going into my room crying, No, that's like, it's just, of course I'm going to say something. Of course I sneaked. First I said, I beg your pardon, loud enough, hopefully for her to hear. And then I just went to my door, quietly opened, craned my head around the bend into her room, and said that I wouldn't hire her as a detective. I just gave my usual sarcasm. I don't even know why I said this, as if it's supposed to be comedic when it's not. But crying? And then telling this to someone, they may or may not believe it. If they do believe it, that's only confirmation that they too don't know me. All the corroboration, the verification that I am a mystery to people, and this is just their way of projecting their own interpretation. They're just filling in the blanks because I don't reveal things about me. All they have is like either a caricature of me or what they want to see. Which leads me back to confabulation. If I didn't reference it at the beginning, confabulation is, in psychiatric terms, meaning the fabrication of events to compensate for memory loss. I'm not saying that my grandmother is suffering from any neurodegeneration, although I do know someone. She has a friend who has Alzheimer's. Not Alzheimer's, but Parkinson's. And the memory, she doesn't really suffer from too much memory-related issues. It's just, she's an ISFJ, so that's another discussion. I have to talk about MBTI, but my grandmother doesn't have any neurodegenerative disorders, and she doesn't have any, she just has a standard problem of, which should be average, having a few moments of memory issues, but not chronic to be of any concern. But my theory is that it's just largely a result of me being so withdrawn and not revealing. And even if I do engage socially and I'm like putting out this image of myself, it's not the real me. It's always going to be my inferior FE as an INTP that's projecting what people want to see, I suppose, or it really is being a chameleon. I'm blending in with the crowd. Either that, or sometimes it's unconscious. But the concept of the real me is illusory. Something that I don't really grasp either, because I don't believe it's a fixed entity. There is no real you because you're constantly evolving. That assumes that you're static, that you're not making any changes, which is not true. And in the endeavor to be static, to have some solid definition, because humans need some sort of structure. And being able to identify, because it goes back to fear of the unknown. Not knowing something, not having any sufficient knowledge about something, makes this entity unpredictable. And to the person, it engenders anxiety, or general discomfort, a malaise, when they're around the person, because they don't know what to make of the person. Mysterious can be either attractive or creepy. And we often know those distinctions. If you're physically attractive, it's already a given that you get a pass for being for displaying dubious conduct. You can get away with a lot of things when you're physically attractive. You could be the class nerd. You could be that one creepy, maybe you might shoot up a school, but foremost, if you're physically attractive, then conventionally attractive, I should say, where many people find you attractive, as opposed to unconventionally attractive, where you have aesthetically pleasing features, but there's just something about you that not everyone would be drawn to. Conventionally attractive is the Chads and probably the Karens in their heyday, when, before they became a Karen, the Karen that we know, because their looks faded. But crying, I'm not ashamed to cry, and I'm certainly not one to get defensive every time someone makes a claim about me. They mention me in anything, and I'm not present. I'm only defensive when it's clearly not true. But if you say something that aligns with how I normally behave, then I'll still have a reaction, which is just, I don't feel comfortable being the topic of being included in conversation, because people are still I value truth. And when you're making these bold, you're free to, but I'm thinking in the future, I'm thinking about all the possible consequences that can arise from that, and how it can affect me negatively, whether directly or indirectly. You're making these. What if this message reaches out to someone that could be my potential employer, or someone that I might need in the future for connections, and you're saying these things that aren't true, and maybe this leads me to continuing to try to to educate people on the distinction between shyness and introversion. They're not mutually inclusive. They're not equivalent. One does not equate to the other. They're both separate entities. They can be. You can be both shy and introverted, but they're not together by default. Being introverted doesn't automatically mean that you're shy, and vice versa. There are plenty of introverts. Being an introvert just means that because they're shy extroverts, and that's hell for them. It's a problem when you're shy and an introvert, but when you actually crave social interaction, being shy while actually wanting to engage with people, and you derive your energy from that, that's horrible. I can empathize. But being introverted just means that you don't derive your energy from being in social interactions. You don't derive energy from conversing with people, interacting with other people. You have to be alone. And some are more introverted than others. The ones who are less introverted they might identify with ambiversion, where they're in the gray area in between. And I'd imagine that in itself is also a bit of hell. Like, how do you attain that balance? Because it's difficult for us all. Us introverts, we have to still remind ourselves that being isolated is not healthy for extended periods, but it's so much harder finding someone that we can feel comfortable and actually feel interested conversing with, sharing a lot of things about us, because talking, all of that involves a lot more energy than people would expect. It's public speaking, whether in that casual setting or in a professional setting, is a physical activity, and you're exerting energy. It takes a lot of effort just to speak And if you're speaking that long and having to articulate, I get tired. But crying, no, legit. Just said she'll go into her room. I'll say something. That's an example of a narcissistic parent. I am not claiming that my grandmother is a narcissistic parent, but based on my extensive observation during adolescence, it's no longer valid anymore. But it definitely had some verity during my adolescence, when her now authoritative parenting was very much authoritarian. And I don't believe that even now she's completely authoritative. She's made a transition. She's like, she still has elements of authoritarian. It's just not as potent and aggressive as it would be for with the way she exercises her parenting now. And a lot of that stems from, I'm empathetic about that, because a lot of this stems from her childhood. She experienced a lot of trauma. We had a discussion about and it transferred to how she parents, and she's only doing what she knows best. And if you knew her, you would know that she's actually doing it because she loves her children. If she didn't, you would have the evidence. You would see it. She takes the time and energy to do things that many average people wouldn't even bother to do. Most people, they would actually just leave their kid, especially if they're at the adult stage now. No, they'll just leave their kid to suffer. Like, no, this is your responsibility now. I don't have the money. I can't take you back into my home. You can't move back in, even after they've clearly stated that they're homeless, so now gonna have to go stay with some stranger. This means that you don't care about your kid. They're going off. They're homeless now. I can understand if you can't financially provide. That's your one reason for not being able to take them back in. But it doesn't matter if you yourself are homeless as a parent. I'm not gonna leave my kid. Okay, we'll be homeless together. Objectively speaking, where's the logic in that? And then there's the whole debacle, the controversy. If the kid has the financial means, it's a two-way street here. It applies to both parties. The same applies if the child is financially well, can support themselves, and even an addition. But they don't. Their parents are clearly suffering, and they don't take them in. But that warrants yet another topic in concerning the character of the parent and or child. Many times, we know you need a valid reason. I can't really speak on this topic from my own perspective, because for one, I don't plan on having children. Marriage is just a question mark still. I would like it. Not only for, I think really just for the sake of all the alleged benefits of it in terms of financially speaking. Both the partner and I share our income. But that's only good in theory, because when the divorce comes in, potentially, that's another issue. It's a whole shitstorm. That completely undoes the financial gain that you get from having shared incomes, because now, and then having shared everything. It's like, I just can't win, so I just resort to my imagination, to my mind, thinking of all the scenarios that occur, and it's the safer option because it's not actually happening, and I can manipulate the situation to where it can always be felicitous. It can always be benign. Not very few of the issues. Crying. She thought I was crying. Yeah, and it still wouldn't have been true a decade ago when I was really depressed. Not just spamming memes of I'm not good. Are you okay? No, I'm saying I'm fine, but there's a sword through my neck. Genuinely just... The unique thing about me is that I can be in that severe declivity, downward slope, yet still be productive. Even during that time, I had like really only a good, I still remember it, there were only like a few good months where I was literally like, I was in this spell where I just slept all day and barely did anything except maybe play games. I would sleep from, I would sleep from like 11 to 11 or noon in the morning. Maybe even further than that. And then in the process, in my waking hours, I would just play games or something, do things that were not really a waste of time, but now I can't do that. I've set myself in this routine and this habit now where I've acclimatized to having to be productive. And I think it's more biological at this point because I just can't physically stay asleep. My circadian rhythm is fixed at this point now to where I can sleep still. It's fixed to where I wake up at the same time, but not really. It's still a bit fluctuating and inconsistent when it comes to sleep to the starting point of my sleeping, because I can sleep as late as 2 or 3 and still wake at 6. And I can't physically force myself. I have to force myself to sleep past 6 because my body is just already prepared to get up. But I can be simultaneously productive, yet mentally in a state of doldrums. It's like just thinking of, like, there's just a pall, a very onyx, sable, dark as the abyss cloud in my head, taking up every corner, every slope, curvature of my cranium. But I'm still working on multiple projects and taking care of my personal hygiene, getting enough rest. Well, everybody else, it's because I'm like Bane, obligatory Bane. I am one with the darkness at this point. People are so afraid. Again, another fear. People are driven by fear. They're afraid to confront the negativity. So they just try to escape with alcohol, drugs, or other means of escape that can allow them to flee from reality for a brief period. But that's the problem. These are only temporary remedies that are not remedies at all. They make it worse. All the alcohol you drink, it doesn't matter if you're even a social drinker, it's still an unhealthy coping mechanism that's ineffective. Because still, at some point, you're still going to feel the aftermath of all of that drinking and smoking, and if you're smoking cigarettes, namely. And all the other quasi addictions you have, they're all going to bite you back in the ass about a decade later. But they're afraid to confront them. And if they do, the easier option is to just project that onto someone else. To blame someone else. Instead of acknowledging that the other problem is not holding themselves accountable for the rut that they've placed themselves in. Like, again, the decade later, you get some liver problems, you get cirrhosis. You have to get a liver, the doctor recommends that you get a liver transplant from all of those previous years of drinking. Now you've been bitch slapped with the medical bill. We invest more time in placing the culpability onto someone else or something else. Well, yeah, you can place it on something, which was the alcohol. Incoming, the type 1 diabetic who has a pantry full of nothing but artificial foods, nothing but these items of quote-unquote food, where the nutritional value yields the highest percentage to the sugar content. And I am referencing someone in particular, but you'll have to investigate that on your own. A pantry full of like all these, just nothing but sweets, junk food. Again, and I warned you this would be a tangent. So back to the main topic is why I was here in the first place, why I decided to open my voice memos, is because my... I'm sure anyone can relate to this. I wanted this to be like a full-fledged comprehensive discussion on confabulation, which again finally is defined in psychiatric terms in psychiatry. It's fabricating events to compensate for memory loss. But I apply this more so to the phenomenon of just basic human psychology, where for interpersonal relations and how we perceive others, we either fill in the blanks because this person hasn't revealed enough about themselves, and people don't like, again, the fear of the unknown. They just make up things that aren't true, and at this point they've done it for so long, because the person has gone so long without being given any indication of their personality, that they believe it. The ones that they relay it to believe it as well. If they believe it, they too don't know who you are. But I just, in the hopes that they do a little critical thinking and they know, well, I've observed this person and their behavior, and that doesn't really sound consistent with what you just said. Going into her room and crying after, which would never even be qualified as an argument, really. Arguments between my grandmother and I is literally, or anyone for that matter, it may be an argument to you, but to me it's just like a little banter. I don't even allow that to happen unless I've really been vexed and you've said, like, you're provoking the anger. The only way someone is gonna, like, they're intentionally trying to make me angry because I know, again, this is where I am much better at assessing other people's emotions than I am my own. And I always anticipate what the outcome will be in a certain situation, how they'll react to what is said or done. I have that prediction. I already have an outline, a framework. I even envision all possible scenarios before it occurs, and then it's just a matter of process of elimination. Oh, well, that one out of the others is what happened. I was still right. People generally have this pattern of behavioral, that generally have these behavioral patterns. So I know, there's barely any conversation between her and I that's not malign to some extent, where it doesn't sound like we're bickering. Because I'm sarcastic, I'm sardonic, and this isn't a regular occurrence. If I really do, it's like me trying to curtail someone's personality. It's my own personal way. It's not me being a shithead. Like on my end, it's also my accountability for not being able to communicate effectively, or doing it not in a positive way. But it's also me years of being rebellious in retaliation to this authoritarian parenting, where I'm not just going to accept authority because largely it's arbitrary. And even still, it's the same thing where I'm like, I can be productive, yet be suffering mentally. Where it seems like I think I'm... It's the same thing where I'll still do what you ask, but simultaneously that doesn't prevent me. I'm not just going to stay silent. Like, I'll literally still be sarcastic and countering your arguments, not agreeing with you while doing the task. More often than not, I am silent. I just don't say anything. I say it, but I don't vocalize it. You just don't hear it. Because it doesn't even matter. Eventually, I'm just of the philosophy that I just hope, even though that's not the best course of action, as on a daily basis, you don't really want to do that all the time, because there's no guarantee that the person will learn from their own mistakes. I'm of the policy that I just wish my hope, a perfect world for me, a utopia for me, an ideal world, would be where people learn from their own mistakes, and they actually do grow. I mean, I understand that it takes longer for people to learn from mistakes and be more self-aware. The problem is that people aren't self-aware. The problem is that people are afraid of confrontation. Being held accountable is the convenience of placing their problems on other people. No, I don't go in these hypothetical arguments. I don't go into my room and cry. What? What? I don't do anything. I go about my business the way I normally do, as if nothing even happened. There is no reaction. What about that warranted something? I mean, like, feel free to instigate an argument towards me. Feel free to use me as a punching bag. Because the purpose of a punching bag is that they don't punch back. By all means, just vent your frustration. And it's because I don't punch back. They fill in the blanks, like they have to give a reaction where none was given, realistically. So, I don't respond to arguments, and I just think it's so interesting. People like the provocation of anger. People are enticed by the negative energy of being angry. It's often all they know. The way our system is designed to be stressed, depressed, all these responsibilities, many of which can be avoided, like namely children and marriage for one. You don't have to have children. You don't have to get married. That's your own personal choice, with the exception of extraneous circumstance where you didn't have a choice, implying to be young and dumb. For the mean. For those who stay on the stabilizing selection spectrum. Stability? But that's another joke, isn't it? The punchline is stability.